Hello, this is my first attempt at recording a video, so it's probably going to be pretty primitive. But the topic is my experience with receiving the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for the so-called COVID-19 infection. I want to try to stick pretty narrowly to my experience and vaccination in general, rather than getting into a lot of other issues about whether this is legitimately an epidemic, which it is, or where it came from, and a lot of other questions. I know there's a lot of wild theories around among some people just about vaccination, like microchips are going to be injected into your body. I'm laughing, I'm sorry. I think it's funny, or that it will permanently alter your DNA. I mean, those are two I know about. Yeah, people that spread those theories, I'm sorry, you don't know what you're talking about. Literally, you don't know what you're talking about. These are pharmaceutical companies. They're not in the business of injecting microchips without your knowledge. It would be illegal. This is being administered worldwide. The countries would not allow their citizens to receive microchips without their consent, and they wouldn't allow it. And I mean, the whole process basically is monitored at every step for safety and quality as best as is possible. No vaccine is 100% safe. No vaccine is 100% effective, but this vaccine overall seems about as effective as any other vaccine that people get, like measles, mumps, rubella, for example, or polio, for example. It's definitely more effective than the annual flu shots that many people take. I personally haven't been accepting annual flu shots because I feel sick every time I get the shot. And I don't feel like I get the flu that often either. Generally, it doesn't seem any worse than the shot. So why should I bother? I have gotten most of the other immunizations that are recommended, like measles, mumps, rubella, polio, pneumococcal pneumonia vaccine, shingles vaccine. There's some others that I have declined and haven't gotten, like hepatitis vaccine, because I don't think I'm really at risk of getting hepatitis. I've totally stopped needle sharing or having sex with other men, for example. Just kidding, I'm just kidding, but I don't think I'm much risk for the hepatitis virus. So it's coming back to vaccination for COVID-19. Yeah, the vaccines were developed very rapidly, but that's because a number of pharmaceutical companies had been researching vaccines for coronaviruses for a decade or more. Also, some had been researching this newer mRNA, that's a messenger RNA type of vaccine, which is a very different approach scientifically from the past vaccinations we've used. You may or may not be familiar or want to know, but most vaccines, they give you either a greatly reduced infectivity dose of a vaccine of a virus, or totally non-toxic altered version of the virus. Then your body sees this foreign substance, develops antibodies against it, and then if you're exposed to the wild virus through contagion, your body is already prepared to combat it. Viruses come in two basic types. There's RNA viruses and DNA viruses, but this mRNA is something that our body uses. Every cell in our body uses mRNA. It's basically a translator. It takes the genetic code that's stored in our DNA and carries it over to the production factories in the cell to make our proteins, which are essential for our body to live. So they just carry the instructions from one place to another. So this is using an mRNA, which when the cell picks it up, it's telling the cell, hey, make some of these spike proteins, not the whole virus, not the active, really, not the part of the virus that actually harms cells, just that so-called spike protein, which enables the virus to latch onto a human cell and then infect it. So if you develop antibodies against the spike protein, you basically block the virus from being able to infect your body's cells. The virus keeps mutating. It's coming out with new variants. You probably all heard that. There's an ongoing investigation to determine whether our current vaccines adequately protect against these variants that crop up. For the most part, they do seem to work, but not quite as well as they did against the original strain. If we end up having to go to annual vaccinations, they will adjust the vaccine to cover the new strains in the same way that they always try to adjust the influenza vaccine to cover the latest, most infectious variant that has appeared in the year prior to delivery of the vaccine. So that's basically, so some of the two main vaccines in the United States use this mRNA technology. That's Pfizer's and Moderna's. Pfizer was the first one to come out, and Moderna was next. They both use messenger RNA, which is artificially encapsulated, covered up by an artificial substance that gets it through the bloodstream to be picked up by our immune system cells that then react to it and produce our immunity. The other type of vaccine that's used in Johnson & Johnson and also in AstraZeneca's and also in the Sinovacs from China and also in Russia's vaccine and a bunch of other vaccine worldwide is the more prevalent, although it's been less prevalent in the US. It's a more traditional way of making a vaccine, which takes the really infectious part of the COVID virus, modifies it so that it will no longer make you sick, and then packages it inside the outer envelope of some less important virus, like a common cold virus. But again, the real heart of the common cold virus is no longer there. It's replaced by a non-infectious variant of the COVID nucleus, which teaches our body to react to it. So it turns out that these two different technologies are having two very different, rare but serious complications. The ones that use this mRNA technique, the Pfizer and the Moderna, they have reports, we're talking like dozens. I think last I saw was maybe 60 or more cases of anaphylaxis, which is a very severe, very rapid allergic reaction, which if it's bad enough, it can kill you. The last I heard, there had not actually been any deaths from these anaphylactic reactions, but it's something you definitely do not want to go through. Many of those patients required emergency, EMS services. Many of them got taken to emergency rooms or even hospitalized, but they did survive. We may have had some fatalities out in the community from this reaction that just haven't been recognized. But compared to your risk of death from getting the COVID virus, your risk of death varies a lot, depending on your age. The older you are, the higher the risk that you'll die. And also your for other factors, chronic diseases that you may have. You've probably heard this other places, obesity. At first, I didn't believe that obesity itself would really be a risk factor. I thought, no, it's got to be all the other things that usually go along with obesity, like it's the high blood pressure, or it's the diabetes, things like that. That no, actually, obesity itself is a risk factor for ending up dying from COVID. And the reason is because obesity produces an inflammatory state in the body all by itself. And many of the deaths from COVID are really deaths from an overreaction of your own body's immune system, such a severe storm of immunity that it's toxic to your own body and you don't survive it. But as I say, hypertension is a risk, diabetes is a risk, heart disease is a risk, lung diseases are a risk, etc. So for the population as a whole, it's hard to get a good grip on the exact percent that die, because it's hard to get a grip on the exact percentage of the whole population that has been infected. No country has studied the entire population in real time to determine total infection rates, but it's a lot higher than deaths from influenza. Every year in the United States, tens of thousands of people die from influenza. That's something comparable to maybe auto accidents, deaths in the United States, and that doesn't stop people from driving cars even when they shouldn't. But no, here we've already had about 500,000 plus known deaths in the United States from COVID-19. So this is, a whole order of magnitude, a factor of 10 higher deaths than influenza causes in any one year. And again, we've undercounted deaths from COVID-19. There are people that have died in the community from the infection, as well as some people that died from the vaccine, that simply weren't recognized as that was actually the cause of their death. So deaths from this anaphylaxis reaction, let's say, if it's like 1 in 100,000, that's certainly a lot better odds than 1 out of 100 that you're going to die from the infection itself. So it might be 1,000 times safer than just waiting to get the virus without having been vaccinated. These odds, again, it's going to vary by a significant amount depending on your age and your overall health. But in almost all age groups and health conditions, it's better, it's safer to get the vaccine than to just wait and get the virus without any protection. There's just a few groups where they're now advising, don't even bother. And that would be people who are near death anyhow, like they've got terminal cancer or other terminal conditions, or they're very elderly and very frail, very, very marginal in their health. Just getting the vaccine and then the reaction to the vaccine may push them over the edge into dying. That's the main group comes to my mind as far as not getting the vaccine. And then, we still don't have the approval that it's safe below age 12, although Pfizer already is looking at giving it to something like 5 to 12-year-olds, so that even if the studies prove to be safe, it will be administered even to kids whose parents are okay with giving it to them. So I was saying there's the two main groups, and the group that is an mRNA vaccine, the ones in the United States being Pfizer and Moderna, have this rare side effect of a severe immediate allergic reaction that can come after the first dose or the second dose. And so some countries are recommending, if you've had any really severe allergic reaction or any bad reaction, especially to an injection of any kind, including prior vaccines or other injections, you might not want to get the vaccine. Well, I did have a severe anaphylactic reaction before to IV CAT scan dye. I had one CAT scan in my life and I almost died from getting it. I had an anaphylactic shock and I was in the emergency room for about 6 hours. I was lucky not to die. A lot of people do. And so I had some reluctance to take Pfizer or Moderna, knowing that I had had a prior anaphylactic reaction to an injection. They even specifically mentioned CAT scan dye reactions as being a risk factor for getting an anaphylactic reaction to those vaccines. We don't know why. They're still trying to figure out what's the exact mechanism that it produces this immediate severe reaction only in rare individuals. But I was at higher risk. Johnson & Johnson didn't have any reports of anaphylaxis. I thought that's really the safer route for me to go. The thing was, it wasn't available for months. Johnson & Johnson failed on its delivery schedule for delivering millions of doses to the US government to then distribute to the states because they were having problems getting the manufacturing to run properly at a US plant that they were just starting production. It had been sitting idle for some time. I think it was actually designed just exactly for this kind of a thing, for a new pandemic where we suddenly needed to make a lot of new vaccine and it hadn't been used yet. So they had some quality control issues. There were delays in the manufacture and delivery, and Johnson & Johnson was hardly available in my county for a couple of months. The only people that were getting it were the homeless, because the big advantage of Johnson & Johnson is just one shot. They don't require a second dose. So, it's a lot harder to get a homeless person to get the second dose because they probably will have moved by the time it comes to get their second dose, and you won't be able to find them. So they were getting it. I couldn't get it. Even though I am a physician, I am a licensed US physician. I couldn't get the Johnson & Johnson. Finally, more supply became available. They started distributing it to local pharmacies. I found a local Bi-Mart that had it in stock, and I made my appointment and I went and I got it. So now I'm going to tell you my own personal reaction to Johnson & Johnson. Is just one individual. I think it might be kind of average. Some people describe basically nothing. Some people say, even getting the shot didn't hurt. I barely felt that I was even getting the shot. That's a good person, and giving the injection really knows what they're doing. I did feel the shot. The needle going in wasn't painful. It was the injecting the liquid that was painful, because she pushed it in rapidly. That stretches your tissues out very quickly, and that causes some pain. So I did have some pain on the injection itself and for a few hours afterwards in that arm. And then after that, I felt normal. Now, for those that take a 2-dose regimen, Pfizer, Moderna, they always describe the second dose as worse than the first. Here with Johnson & Johnson, it's only 1 dose, but probably the most common symptoms shortly after vaccination, they seem to peak maybe around 12 hours after receiving it. A typical person's story would be, well, I got the vaccine that morning and the rest of that day I felt okay. And then I went to bed, and then I woke up in the middle of the night with a headache and fever and chills. And I just felt terrible. But then by the morning it was starting to get better. And by the end of day 2, I felt okay. That kind of seemed like maybe 12 hours for a peak response. Well, I got my vaccine at, I think it was 11:10 in the morning, because I had to wait a full half hour. rather than 15 minutes because my history of a prior severe allergic reaction. I remember I got out at 11:40. Felt normal the rest of that waking day, except that my appetite was down. I didn't feel like eating much at dinner time. I couldn't really say why, but I didn't have my usual appetite. Then around 7:30 p.m., so we're talking about 8 hours after the dose, I felt violently sick. Suddenly I had some of the worst chills that I can remember. And I don't know, since maybe I was a kid or something. It was bad. I was dressed very warmly. I turned up the thermostat and then I put a blanket on top of myself and my whole body was still shivering. That was the most unpleasant part. Subjectively, I didn't feel like I had a temperature. I didn't take my temperature. I didn't really have body aches, although I sure didn't feel like getting up and doing anything. All I wanted to do was stay under that blanket and wait for the chills to pass. After a while, I finally fell asleep. And then by the time I woke up at some point in the middle of the night, probably to use the restroom, the chills were gone and I was pretty much back to normal. So by the next morning, I felt pretty much my usual self again. I had slight residual aching around the site where I got the injection. That lasted for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days maybe of mild aching. So when that reaction first came on, about 7 or 8 hours after the injection, I thought, oh man, if I'm going to feel like this for a full day, it's going to be horrible. But fortunately, it only lasted for a few hours. And by the way, it kind of reinforces a belief that I've had, which I cannot prove, that I already had the COVID-19 virus. As it turned out, just coincidentally, my wife and I had taken a vacation to Asia in January of 2020. That was right when, China announced, hey, we got a new virus that's spreading rapidly. Our last stop in Asia was Hong Kong, which is part of China, and everything was closed down. Everyone was wearing masks. I think we were maybe the last international flight to be permitted to land. Last cruise ship to dock. We were either the last or the next to last cruise ship that was permitted to dock there before they closed the border. We were on one of the last international flights out of Hong Kong back to the US. Very long plane ride across the Pacific. I don't think I got it in any of those places, although the virus was spreading. I think when we were there for just the one or 2 days in Hong Kong, one patient had been hospitalized in Hong Kong at that point. I think I got it in San Francisco International Airport. Hundreds of people got off the plane, and probably other planes from Asia, from China. We had a very long wait in that airport. I checked into the Red Carpet Club, a nice lounge. It was much better than sitting in those plastic seats at a landing gate for 12 hours or something. But I remember sitting down in there and there was an Asian guy. He was not real close to me. He was maybe 12, 14 feet away, but he was coughing a lot. It finally made me so nervous. I got up and I moved further away from him. And I think I probably caught it from him. I think he probably had it. I probably got it. Anyhow, at first they were saying, well, the incubation period, the period between getting exposed and then feeling sick is about 7 days. So I wait 7 days and I still feel okay. And I think, oh, well, okay. I guess I wasn't exposed to the COVID. There weren't that many cases reported yet anyhow, not in the US certainly. But then at about day 9, I got a dry cough. which, by the way, is one of the hallmarks, one of the early symptoms of infection with COVID-19. And that way it's different from the usual cold viruses, and it's different from the flu too. It doesn't start with a stuffy nose. It doesn't start with that scratchy kind of pain in the back of your nose. It doesn't start with sore throat. It goes right to the lung. Do not stop. Do not pass go. Don't collect $200. Go right to the lung. Dry cough. Nothing coming up at first. At first I thought, well, maybe it's allergies, because I do have allergies to some of the pollens around here. By day 2, I knew, no, I'm sick, because now the cough was turning productive and I felt so tired. I didn't have much of a fever. I didn't have very much in the way of body aches. I just had enormous fatigue and this really aggravating cough that made it very difficult to sleep at night. But I spent 5 days essentially lying on the couch doing nothing except drinking fluids, eating little bites of food, going to the bathroom, and sleeping. After 5 days, I felt better. And it wasn't until about 2 months later, we keep every day listening to the news about the virus, that I said, I think I probably had it. And then just the same day that I was getting better, my wife felt kind of sick, but she didn't get as sick as I did. She felt unusually tired. She went to bed earlier than normal. She slept longer than normal. Next day she got up, she felt okay. That was it for her. Well, finally they came testing for antibodies in your blood to the virus became available through. I used a Quest diagnostic laboratory. I went and I got a test and it said, no, you don't have any antibodies. But then it turns out a lot of people within 2 or 3 months after the infection, you can't find the antibodies in their blood anymore. That doesn't mean that you don't still have an immune response if you encounter that virus again, because there's immune cells in your system that remember. And if you get exposed to it again, they will immediately go to work attacking the virus again, even though you don't see the antibodies in the bloodstream beforehand. So the fact that I didn't have antibodies doesn't prove that I didn't have the virus. If I had had the antibodies, it would have proven that I had the virus. But then, more than a year later, when I finally got vaccinated, the speed with which this reaction came on and the rapid peak of symptoms only about 8 hours after the dose makes me think my body was already primed to react to this viral material. It was fast on, fast off. Then I was okay. So the other thing I should mention is these vaccines like Johnson & Johnson, all the other ones, the Sinovac and Russia's whatever, Sputnik or whatever it's called, I forget, and AstraZeneca and so on. They have a different side effect that's seen in some people. Again, it's much less risky than getting the virus itself, but it's still a caution, and that is some people get blood clots, and some people are known to have died from the blood clots. So an uncommon reaction, if it's, I don't know if it's 1 in 10,000 or what, it's more common, I think, than the anaphylaxis, but it's still not real common. It can occur in healthy young people, middle-aged people. It doesn't seem to happen in people over age 50. They've all been 50 or younger. Well, I'm over 70, so I thought, I don't think I need to worry about the blood clot with Johnson & Johnson. At my age, there's no reports of blood clots, and there are reports of anaphylaxis with the other two. I'm going with the Johnson & Johnson. I did. I'm glad I did. I feel pretty well protected. I could get sick from being exposed to the virus again. I don't think I'll get nearly as sick as I would if I hadn't been vaccinated. I recommend it, but it's worth looking into those rare side effects. And if you qualify as being a perhaps possibly higher risk for one or the other. And again, I really like the convenience of the Johnson & Johnson just one and done. That's all for today. Thanks.